The Sinai Peninsula, or simply Sinai, is a peninsula in Egypt, situated between the Mediterranean Sea to the north and the Red Sea to the south, serving as a land bridge between Asia and Africa. It is the only part of Egyptian territory located in Asia. Sinai has a land area of about 60,000 square kilometers and a population of approximately 1,400,000 people. The bulk of the peninsula is divided administratively into two of Egypt's 27 governorates. The Sinai Peninsula has been a part of Egypt from the first dynasty of ancient Egypt until the 21st century. This comes in stark contrast to the region north of it, the Levant, which, due largely to its strategic geopolitical location and cultural convergences, has historically been the center of conflict between Egypt and various states of Mesopotamia and Asia Minor. In periods of foreign occupation, the Sinai was, like the rest of Egypt, also occupied and controlled by foreign empires. In more recent history, the Ottoman Empire and the United Kingdom. Israel invaded and occupied Sinai during the Suez Crisis of 1956, and during the Six-Day War of 1967. On 6 October 1973, Egypt launched the Yom Kippur War to retake the peninsula, which was the site of fierce fighting between Egyptian and Israeli forces. By 1982, as a result of the Israel-Egypt Peace Treaty of 1979, Israel had withdrawn from all of the Sinai Peninsula except the contentious territory of Taba, which was returned after a ruling by a commission of arbitration in 1989. Today, Sinai has become a tourist destination due to its natural setting, rich coral reefs, and biblical history. Mount Sinai is one of the most religiously significant places in Abrahamic faiths. The name Sinai may have been derived from the ancient moon god Sinai from the Hebrew word sen. Of the peninsula acquired the name due to the assumption that a mountain near St. Catherine's Monastery is the biblical Mount Sinai. However, this assumption is contested. In addition to its formal name, Egyptians also refer to it as Ard al-Faraz. The ancient Egyptians called it Ta-Mefkit, or land of turquoise. Geography. Sinai is triangular in shape, with northern shore lying on the southern Mediterranean Sea, and southwest and southeast shores on Gulf of Suez and Gulf of Aqaba of the Red Sea. It is linked to the African continent by the Isthmus of Suez, 125 kilometers wide strip of land containing the Suez Canal. The Eastern Isthmus, linking it to the Asian mainland, is around 200 kilometers wide. The peninsula's eastern shore separates the Arabian Plate from the African Plate. The southernmost tip is the Ras Mohammed National Park. Most of the Sinai Peninsula is divided among the two governorates of Egypt, South Sinai and North Sinai. Together, they comprise around 60,000 square kilometers and have a population of 597,000. Three more governorates span the Suez Canal, crossing into Africa and Egypt. Suez is on the southern end of the Suez Canal, Ismailia in the center, and Port Said in the north. The largest city of Sinai is Arish, capital of the North Sinai, with around 160,000 residents. Other larger settlements include Sharm el-Sheikh and El-Tor on the southern coast. Inland Sinai is arid, mountainous and sparsely populated, the largest settlements being St. Catherine and Nekhel. Climate. Sinai is one of the coldest provinces in Egypt because of its high altitudes and mountainous topographies. Winter temperatures in some of Sinai's cities and towns reach -16 degrees Celsius. History. Ancient Egypt Sinai was called Mafkit, or country of turquoise, by the ancient Egyptians, who called its inhabitants Monachu. For the time of the first dynasty before, the Egyptians mined turquoise in Sinai, two locations, now called by their Egyptian Arabic names Wadi Mafar and Serabat el-Kadam. The mines were worked intermittently and on a seasonal basis for thousands of years. Modern attempts to exploit the deposits have been unprofitable. These may be the first historically attested mines. In the Hebrew Bible, according to the Hebrew Bible, the peninsula was crossed by the Israelites during the Exodus from Egypt. This included numerous halts over a 40-year period of travel sometime towards the end of the Bronze Age. The historicity of the event is disputed and its date varies in Jewish traditions. Assyrian period, Achaemenid Persian period. At the end of the time of Darius I, the Great Sinai was part of the Persian province of Abu-Nara, which means beyond the river. Cambyses successfully managed the crossing of the hostile Sinai Desert, traditionally Egypt's first and strongest line of defense, and brought the Egyptians under Psamtik III, son and successor of Ahmose, to battle at Pelusium. The Egyptians lost and retired to Memphis. The city fell to the Iranian control and the pharaoh was carried off in captivity to Susa in mainland Iran. Hellenistic period, Roman and Byzantine periods, early Muslim period, Ayyubid period. During Crusade it was under control of Fatimid Caliphate. Later Saladin abolished Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt and took this region under his control. 2. It was military route from Cairo to Damascus during Crusade. Mamluk and Ottoman periods. The peninsula was governed as part of Egypt under the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt from 1260 until 1517, when the Ottoman Sultan, Selim the Grim, defeated the Egyptians at the battles of Majdabik and Al-Radania and incorporated Egypt into the Ottoman Empire. For then until 1906, Sinai was administered by the Ottoman provincial government of the Pashalik of Egypt, even following the establishment of the Muhammad Ali dynasty's rule over the rest of Egypt in 1805. British control. In 1906, the Ottoman Porte formally transferred administration of Sinai to the Egyptian government, which essentially meant that it fell under the control of the United Kingdom, who had occupied and largely controlled Egypt since 1882. The border imposed by the British runs in an almost straight line from Rafah on the Mediterranean shore to Taba on the Gulf of Aqaba. This line has served as the eastern border of Egypt ever since wars with Israel at the beginning of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Egyptian forces entered the former British Mandate of Palestine from Sinai to support Palestinian and other Arab forces against the newly declared State of Israel. For a period during the war, Israeli forces entered the northeastern corner of Sinai, with the exception of Palestine's Gaza Strip, which came under the administration of the All-Palestine government. The western frontier of the former Mandate of Palestine became the Egyptian-Israeli frontier under the 1949 Armistice Agreement. In 1958, the Gaza Strip came under direct Egyptian military administration, though it was governed separately from Sinai, and was never annexed by Egypt. The Egyptian government maintained that Egyptian administration would be terminated upon the end of the conflict with Israel. In 1956, Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal, a waterway marking the boundary between Egyptian territory in Africa and the Sinai Peninsula. Thereafter, Israeli ships were prohibited from using the canal, owing to the state of war between the two states. Egypt also prohibited ships from using Egyptian territorial waters on the eastern side of the peninsula to travel to and from Israel. effectively imposing a blockade on the Israeli port of Eilat. Subsequently, in what is known in Egypt as the tripartite aggression, Israeli forces, aided by Britain and France, invaded Sinai and occupied much of the peninsula within a few days. Several months later, Israel withdrew its forces from Sinai, following strong pressure from the United States and the Soviet Union. Thereafter, the United Nations Emergency Force was stationed in Sinai to prevent any further conflict in the Sinai. In 1967, Egypt reinforced its military presence in Sinai and on 16 May ordered the UNEF out of Sinai with immediate effect. Secretary-General U Thant eventually complied and ordered the withdrawal without Security Council authorization. In the course of the Six-Day War that broke out shortly thereafter, Israel captured the entire Sinai Peninsula and Gaza Strip from Egypt, the West Bank from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria. The Suez Canal, the east bank of which was now occupied by Israel, was closed. Israel commenced efforts at large-scale Israeli settlement in the peninsula. Following the Israeli conquest of Sinai, Egypt launched the War of Attrition aimed at forcing Israel to withdraw from Egyptian territory. The war saw protracted conflict in the Suez Canal zone, ranging from limited to large-scale combat. Israeli shelling of the cities of Port Said, Ismailia, and Suez on the west bank of the canal led to high civilian casualties, and contributed to the flight of 700,000 Egyptian internal refugees. Ultimately, the war concluded in 1970 with no change in the front line. On 6 October 1973, Egypt commenced Operation Badr to retake the Sinai, while Syria launched a simultaneous operation to retake the Golan Heights, thereby beginning the Yom Kippur War. Egyptian engineering forces built pontoon bridges to cross the Suez Canal, and stormed the Bar-Lev Line, Israel's defensive line along the canal. Though the Egyptians maintained control of most of the east bank of the canal, in the later stages of the war, the Israeli military crossed the southern section of canal, cutting off the Egyptian Third Army, and occupied a section of the west bank. The war ended following a mutually agreed-upon ceasefire. After the war, as part of the subsequent Sinai disengagement agreements, Israel withdrew from the canal, with Egypt agreeing to permit passage of Israeli ships. The canal was reopened in 1975, with President Sadat leading the first convoy through the canal aboard an Egyptian destroyer. 1979 Peace Treaty with Israel and aftermath. In 1979, Egypt and Israel signed a peace treaty in which Israel agreed to withdraw from the entirety of Sinai. Israel subsequently withdrew in several stages, ending in 1982. The Israeli pullout involved dismantling almost all Israeli settlements, including the settlement of Yamid in northeastern Sinai. The exception was the coastal city of Sharm el-Sheikh, which the Israelis had founded as off-era during the period of their occupation. The treaty allows monitoring of Sinai by the multinational force and observers, and limits the number of Egyptian military forces in the peninsula. Recent security issues. In recent years, Sinai has been the site of several terror attacks against tourists, the majority of whom are Egyptian. Investigations have shown that these were mainly motivated by a resentment of the poverty faced by many Bedouin in the area. Attacking the tourist industry was viewed as a method of damaging the industry so that the government would pay more attention to the situation. Since the 2011 Egyptian revolution, unrest has become more prevalent in the area, including the 2012 Egyptian-Israeli border attack in which 16 Egyptian soldiers were killed by militants. Also on the rise are kidnappings of refugees. According to Meron Estefanos, Eritrean refugees are often kidnapped by Bedouin in the northern Sinai, tortured, raped, and only released after receiving a large ransom. Under President el-Sisi, Egypt has implemented a rigorous policy of controlling the border to the Gaza Strip, including the dismantling of tunnels between Gaza and Sinai. Demographics: the two governorates of North and South Sinai and have a total population of 597,000. This figure rises to 1,400,000 by including Western Sinai, the parts of the Port Said, Ismailia and Suez governorates lying east of the Suez Canal. Port Said alone has a population of roughly 500,000 people. Portions of the populations of Ismailia and Port Said live in West Sinai, while the rest live on the western side of the Suez Canal. Population of Sinai has largely consisted of desert-dwelling Bedouins with the colorful traditional costumes and significant culture. Large numbers of Egyptians from the Nile Valley and Delta moved to the area to work in tourism, but development adversely affected the native Bedouin population. In order to help alleviate the problems, various NGOs began to operate in the region, including the Mackay Trust, a UK charity that assists the Bedouin in developing a sustainable income while protecting Sinai's natural environment, heritage and culture. Economy: since the Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty, Sinai's scenic spots and religious structures have become important to the tourism industry. The most popular tourist destination in Sinai are Mount Sinai and St. Catherine's Monastery, which is considered to be the oldest working Christian monastery in the world, and the beach resorts of Sharm el-Sheikh, Dahab, Nuweiba and Taba. Most tourists arrive at Sharm el-Sheikh International Airport, through Eilat, Israel and the Taba border crossing, by road from Cairo or by ferry from Aqaba in Jordan.